up, we have Black Sun by Rebecca Roanhorse. This is the first book of the Between Earth and Sky trilogy, the second book being Fevered Star, which I believe came out earlier this year. The winter solstice is a special occasion in the holy city of Tova, but this year it coincides with the solar eclipse, which symbolizes an unbalancing of the world. A ship is bound for Tova and set to arrive on the solstice, and that ship carries only one passenger. He's been labeled as harmless, but usually those who are labeled as such end up being the villains. This is a fantasy series set in a world that is similar to the pre-Columbian Americas, and I am looking very respectfully. Okay, but on a serious note, I am very excited for this, and I've seen this talked about quite a few times on BookTube as well. I was pondering for the better part of a year whether I should read it, and then I caved, so we'll see how this goes. Next up, we have the graphic novel adaptation of Prodigy by Marie Lu, which is the second book in the Legend series, which in turn is probably my favorite YA dystopian series. And believe it or not, Legend is probably one of the first books that I legit fell head over heels for. I also own the graphic novel adaptation of Legend, and I definitely want to read that when I have time. The series is set in the near future, where the US is divided into two countries, the colonies to the east and the Republic to the west, and both of them are constantly at war with each other. The story follows two main POV characters, June, who is a military prodigy born into an elite family, and Day, which is not his real name, who is the Republic's most wanted criminal. When June's older brother is murdered and Day becomes the prime suspect, the two of them get caught up in a game of cat and mouse, but in the process, the two of them discover the truth of the incident that brought them together in the first place. I've always contemplated how the series would hold up if I read it today as a 24-year-old who's gotten into much different things. But I can say with certainty that as a 16-year-old fetus reader reading this for the first time in 2013, just discovering the joy of reading, this series blew my mind. And I say that without having read the fourth book. Oops! That being said, Rebel is on my TBR, and this series has a very special place in my heart, right up there with the Hunger Games. So yeah. Next up, we have another mystery novel with a very metal title indeed. The Wolf and the Watchmen by Nicholas Not-Doktag. This man's name is literally night and day. How do you compare? The year is 1793, and paranoia and conspiracies have Stockholm in a chokehold. When an ex-soldier finds a mutilated body in the city's lake, he feels compelled to give the man a proper burial. But this catches the attention of a lawyer-turned-consulting detective to the Stockholm police, and together they try to identify the man while encountering the underbelly of Stockholm's elite. Their paths also cross with a man who has left rural life to become a doctor, and a woman who has been thrown into a workhouse after upsetting her parish priest. If you couldn't already tell, dark historical murder mysteries are quickly becoming another weakness of mine. But believe it or not, I picked up this book entirely on a whim while I was shopping for a graduation present for one of my cousins, who is graduating from med school in about a month. But this title slaps, as I said, so does the premise. But as I said, the title slaps, and so does the premise, which is why I picked the book up, and when I saw it was a murder mystery, my heart soared with joy. Next up is Velvet Was the Night by Silvia Moreno Garcia, who also wrote Mexican Gothic and Gods of Jade and Shadow. This is a novel set in 1970s Mexico and follows a secretary who actively ignores the activists protesting outside her door in favor of seeking the romance she finds in comic books. When her next-door neighbor disappears, she has to search for her, and during her search journeys into her neighbor's secret life of radicals and dissidents. At the same time, a man called El Elvis is assigned to search for this missing woman, and ends up searching for his own soul in the process. This book caught my eye at a Barnes & Noble about an hour from where I am while I was having dinner with a couple of relatives, but I didn't really get to pick it up. I did choose to come back for it when I was shopping at the local Indigo, and I'm glad I did because this book has a very exciting premise. Also, there's a man literally called El Elvis, and I am screaming in both amusement and confusion at the same time. Next book is This Woven Kingdom by Tahara Mafi, who is also the author of the Shadowy series. This is the first book in a YA fantasy trilogy and was released earlier this year. The story follows the heir to an ancient Jin kingdom who is forced to hide in plain sight as a servant, and a crown prince who is looking for the monster destined to eat his father as foretold in the prophecies. Naturally, these two cross paths. And then they fall for each other. As the synopsis says, this woven kingdom is a story of clashing empires, forbidden romance, and a long-forgotten queen who has to reclaim her throne. Now, clashing empires and monsters in particular sounds delectable, and I am here for that. Also, I only noticed this a few hours ago, but can we talk about how gorgeous this spine is? I live. The next book is... Hey. The Diamond Eye by Kate Quinn. This is a historical novel based on an actual story that happened about a history student working a library job who is sent to fight during World War II. After yeeting 300 people, she is sent to the US on a goodwill tour. This is one of the 2 books I got at the airport when I was coming back from my stay in Toronto, so this is pretty much an impulse buy, but also a backup plan because I knew I was going to finish Evermore by Sarah Holland on the plane right back. But as it so happens, I finished Evermore right as we were landing, so this is gonna have to wait. I do like the premise though, and it's not often that I read historical works in this vein specifically, so I'm looking forward to it. It's funny I mentioned the books I got at the airport, because the other book I got at the airport is... Daughter of the Moon Goddess by Sunlin Ascends. This is the first in a fantasy duology about a girl hidden away on the moon because she's being hidden from the Celestial Emperor, who exiled her mother after she stole the elixir of immortality. After a particular incident involving her magic, she has to flee her home and leave her mother behind. Quests, treachery, and legendary creatures ensue. As I said, this is the other book I got at the airport, and as with The Diamond Eye, I really like the premise. If there's magic and treachery, I'm sold. Next up is Volume 2 of Laughing Under the Clouds. I read Volume 1 in May, and for those of you who are new here and stumbling on the channel for the first time, I'll sum this up pretty quickly. In an alternate version of the early Meiji era, which lasted from 1868 to 1912, the Japanese government's response to the increasing crime rate is to build an inescapable prison. And by inescapable, I mean situated in the middle of a giant freaking lake. Unbeknownst to just about the entire world, the prison is not really what it seems to be, and it may play a larger role in something much greater than we're initially led to believe. As I said, I read Volume 1 in May, and it was alright. Good enough to get me to Volume 2. I didn't hate it, but there was a little bit more, so hopefully this gets better. The next book is Volume 1 of Devil's Line. This is the first volume of a supernatural manga series about a college student who is saved from an attack by a devil, one of the many vampires that can blend in among the human population. This again? Yes, this again. The half-devil who saves her uses his supernatural gifts as a member of an underground task force specializing in devil-related crime in Tokyo. But as he spends more time with the girl, his ironclad rule of never drinking human blood is thrown into jeopardy. Clearly, I am not choosing the vampires are choosing me. And I swear on my bookshelf that that is the honest truth. How did we get here with my monster vampires that don't sparkle in the sun obsession? That's a story for another time, but the premise sounds neat and I am here for it either way. Next up we have a bit of a curveball. Volume 1 of The Holy Grail of Heiress. This is the first volume of a light novel series about a girl whose only notable trait is her sincerity. When someone steals her fiancé and accuses her of theft, a ghost appears before her with a bargain. However, this is a ghost that was executed about 10 years prior for her wicked deeds. And she wants revenge. I say curveball here because I don't normally read light novels, so, like, about half of the stuff on this book haul, I got this on a whim. However, the premise does sound very intriguing. Who doesn't love a little bit of quality revenge? Next is... Wait a minute. We're missing someone. Come back! My son, I did not raise you so you could run off like that. Come here. There we go. As I was saying, the next book is Volume 2 of the Case Study of Vanitas. I read Volume 1 in March, and it absolutely slapped. Sir, I think you have some fruit punch on your pants. This is a historical fantasy manga about a man who travels to Paris in search of a mythical grimoire known as the Book of Vanitas. His search leads him to cross paths with a man claiming to be a vampire doctor, and things just escalate from there. I have plans to read this very soon, and as I said, I love the first volume, and the art is chef's kiss. I would definitely recommend this if you're into historical fantasy and main characters who flex on people and will probably laugh about it afterwards. Next up is Volume 2 of Nordigami. I read Volume 1 in March and it also slapped. Not quite as much as the case study of Vanitas, but I love this nonetheless. Yato is a god with a plan. Build a solid base of worshippers and the temple of his dreams. To achieve this goal, he set up a delivery service to help people in need with whatever they need help with. If you like supernatural stories with a side of action, then I do recommend Nordigami. The first volume has a bit of a slow start, but the second half goes hard. I did enjoy Volume 1, and I'm looking forward to starting Volume 2. Not much else to say about this, so yeah. Next up, we have Volume 1 of Land of the Lustrous. This is the start of a high fantasy manga series, and it also received an anime adaptation in 2017. The story is set in a world inhabited by crystalline beings known as the Lustrous, who are forced to protect themselves against the Lunarians who want to turn them into decorations. Phosphophyllite wants to fight alongside their fellow Lustrous, but unfortunately for them, they're the weakest and the most brittle of the Lustrous, which means they get relegated to a desk job. However, this puts Phos into contact with Cinnabar, who is forced to live in isolation, and the two of them seek out the fulfillment they both desire. Hey everybody, look, it's the Lustrous! I am a collector of shiny rocks, so if there's anything involving or based on shiny rocks, I'm probably going to read it. Also, the whole being turned into decorations thing makes it seem like there's gonna be some element of... I'm not sure whether to call it body horror, but I am here for the impending suffering. The next book is Sunlin Ascends by Josiah Bancroft. This is the first of the Books of Babel, and officially it's fantasy, but I've also seen it classified as science fiction, so we'll see about that. Thomas Sunlin is the headmaster of a small village school who arrives at the Tower of Babel for his honeymoon, but soon after arriving he is separated from his wife and he has to find her. In order to do so, however, he has to navigate theaters, ballrooms, and all things of that nature while avoiding assassins and a flying fortress. Sounds hot. This is another book that has been on my radar for a while, though it wasn't until I saw quite a few booktubers talk about this that I got more interested. Also, main characters who aren't all, I have a straw and I'm going to destroy you with it, and aren't the fighting type at first will always be a weakness of mine. Next up is a book that I am low-key excited for. Volume 1 of Arakawa Under the Bridge. Haha, he has a starfish head. Ko Ichinomiya was born with a considerable amount of wealth, but one day he finds himself indebted to a young woman living on the banks of the Arakawa River claiming to be from Venus. Ko is at a loss for how to repay his debt until the woman asks him to teach her about love. This leads him to cross paths with a number of eccentric characters who have formed their own way of living outside the typical bounds of Tokyo life. This was another impulse buy, but it seems like a lot of fun. I believe the author of this manga is also the creator of the critically acclaimed Saint Young Men, which is a comedy manga about Jesus and Buddha sharing an apartment in modern-day Japan and learning about contemporary Japanese life. I'm about as confused as you probably are at that premise. Anyway, if you want a more unofficial reason as to why I'm excited to read this, there's a character on the back with a starfish head. That's hot. Next up is Age of Ash by Daniel Abraham. This is book 1 of the Kithamar trilogy and was very recently released. The story takes place in the city of Kithamar, who would have thought, and the main character Alice sets out from the slums she calls home to solve her brother's murder. But there is much more to Alice's brother than she thinks, and what she discovers gets her swept up in some spicy hot intrigue. As with several other books on this list, I saw this on my Instagram feed, and I was immediately hooked. It was probably the title, and maybe the cover. If you got a banger title, then I'm already sold. Fun fact, this was written by the same author who wrote the Dagger and Coin series, and The Expanse, and also the Long Price Quartet, I think? And I've heard a number of good things about all those series, so hopefully this one is good too. Next up is another surprise! A Tale of Magic by Chris Colfer. This is book 1 in the A Tale of Magic series, dots included. This is a middle grade fantasy series, and I want it on the record now that I have not touched a middle grade book in about 13 years. As a matter of fact, the last book resembling a middle grade in any capacity that I remember reading was A Stone in My Hand by Catherine Clinton, which is a historical fiction novel set in 1988 in Gaza City. I read it in middle school, and for like 3 years or so, I thought it was the best thing on the planet. But I digress. The story takes place in a world where magic is outlawed, and the main character, Bristol, discovers she is a fairy that can use magic, which is a problem. A very illegal problem. Bristol is rescued from a correctional facility and enrolled in an academy of magic, but when her savior goes missing, she and her new classmates must put their new skills to the test. As I said, I have not touched a middle grade in a very long time, but Vada over at Vidania Silverscribe mentioned the second book, A Tale of Witchcraft, in her May wrap-up, and, you know what? Let me just show you a very rough reenactment of how my brain reacted to the premise. I smell magic. And the rest is history. I am more used to reading YA and adult literature, and I've been reading both since high school, so like several other books on this book haul, this is a new venture for me. We like breaths of fresh air in this house. Next up is Volume 1 of Log Horizon, The West Wind Brigade. Now, I'd like to point out that on the back cover, it says, "The beautiful harem guild fights bravely." You might have the looks, but do you have the skills? Because that's much more important. The West Wind Brigade is renowned in the online world of Elder Tales, most notably for their skills and the gorgeous people who inhabit it. When an expansion pack traps the people who play the game inside, it's up to the guildmaster Sojiro to keep his friends safe. Another impulse buy. Is anybody surprised? I am going into this completely blind, but the art looks delicious. I've always given a side eye to the whole trapped in the video game thing, but as with the Eminence in Shadow, I am willing to take a chance on this as well. Last but certainly not least, we have Volume 1 of To Your Eternity. This is the first volume of an ongoing fantasy manga about an immortal being who takes on multiple forms as it learns what it means to be truly human. One more fun fact for the video, the creator of this manga also created a silent voice, which I have heard nothing but good things about, and I'll probably get into that when I have a free moment. Having said that, I did pick this up with relatively high expectations, and it looks like it'll be delicious. That took a whole hero's journey to film, and now my brain is fried. And it probably will be fried for the next month. But if you like this book haul, be sure to like and subscribe, and if you sat through all of that, leave a book emoji down in the comments. For my next video, I'm gonna try to mash together my June wrap-up and my July TBR, primarily for the sake of convenience, so we'll see how that goes. Anyway, thanks for watching! Now before I end this video, I would like to add one more thing. People of the jury, it happened. Also, you might want to turn your volume down if you have headphones. And then we have Volume 1 of